Welcome back to the Canterlot Archives. I see you couldn't wait to get to this volume, the very last in the Condensed History series. Although, I have to say it makes me a little sad. After you finish reading the Condensed History of Equestria, I hope you'll keep coming back to the archives. There's a lot of history to read about, and the Condensed Histories really only just brush on everything. And that's only equestrian history. There are so many different nations and myths to learn about, so many ancient mysteries. But I won't keep you from enjoying your book any longer. Here we are. I imagine you're eager to read it. Since it's our last one, why don't we look at it together again? Many decades passed after Celestia's challenge with the Sultan of Saddle Arabia, and the world was mostly peaceful. But while Equestria remained free of war, the same could not be said for her neighbors. Germany and Grifania were on poor terms, both being nations of proud warriors, and conflicts inevitably broke out between them. Other nations preferred to distance themselves from the fight, remaining strictly uninvolved. This limited their battles to a few locations, and as the Griffins preferred to use their flight to their advantage, they primarily chose the mountains of the Schwarzwälder bordering Germany. This was an old and unexplored region, known for extreme weather, as it had been covered by enormous black clouds for longer than anyone could remember. But the battles between Germany and the Griffins disturbed the area, causing a great many avalanches, and opening caves that had been buried in snow for eons. And then, one day, the clouds covering the Schwarzwälder disappeared, gracing them with sunlight for the first time in ages. It was not realized at the time, but the war between the Griffins and the Percheron Knights had awakened something that had been sleeping since an untold age. And once the snows began to melt, there was nothing left to restrain it. The mountains of Schwarzwälder were home to many fearsome dragons, but none as infamous as Bahamut. Also called Ragnarok by the Percherons of Germany, Bahamut was a dragon wizard that once terrorized their lands, his greed so intense as to make him steal from his own brethren, declaring himself as their king. This angered the other dragons, and they fought against their brother deep within the Schwarzwälder. Their rampaging battle brought the mountains down around them, and Bahamut was trapped between several tons of snow and stone. Unable to free himself, or even move, Bahamut fell into a deep slumber, creating the black clouds that covered the mountains for countless generations. But the warring between the Percherons and the Griffins had disturbed the Schwarzwälder, rousing Bahamut from his ancient sleep. Because he had been in hibernation so long, Bahamut had grown immense with his age, bigger than any dragon in recorded history. And his greed had grown with him. Bahamut immediately set about rebuilding his horde, using dragon magic to enslave those he came across and force them into servitude. Within a month, Germany was in his claws. The nobles of Germany had escaped south overseas, to the land of their allies, the Zebras. They regrouped their forces and prepared for an assault on their own kingdom, the Zebras pledging their legions and assistance. The nation of Zebraca had once been an expansive territory ruled by a peaceful council of many tribes. They possessed a proud and honorable culture with ties to ancient magics. However, the joint assault led against Bahamut by their allies proved disastrous, succeeding only in drawing the dragon's attention. They were defenseless against the powerful sorcery of dragon magic. And after enslaving their invading forces, Bahamut turned them on their own homeland. The unified kingdoms of Zebraca were razed to the ground by friendly swords and dragon flame. Even to this day, they haven't recovered from that devastation. It was only after this tremendous loss that the nations of the known world realized the Dragon King would not be satisfied with the plunder of one kingdom. An emergency summit of leaders was called, with Equestria serving as its center. Princess Celestia was known to devote entire decades to her research of unusual topics, among which dragon lore was included. Protected behind spellstone barriers, they pored over the accumulated knowledge in the archives, seeking a weakness to exploit. And it was in her many volumes that Celestia came upon the name of another dragon, said to share a bitter rivalry with Bahamut, the dragon Tarrasque of Prance. The council appealed to the she-dragon, promising riches in exchange for her help. Dragons are wholly individualistic creatures, and typically can be coerced into cooperation for a steep contribution to their hordes. But even Tarrasque would not challenge her brother Bahamut, despite the riches they promised. Instead, she made a wager. If they could bring her a relic from the city within Eternity's Crossing, then and only then would she aid them. Suffice to say that Tarrasque expected such an endeavor to be impossible. The vortex of Eternity's Crossing could not be pierced by ship or magic, and any who tried would die in the attempt. Or so she thought. Princess Celestia is the only known individual to have ever pierced the barrier of Eternity's Crossing. Records show her taking a spell ship within sight of the vortex, before flying into the sky, alone and out of sight. Moments later, there was a brilliant flash of rainbow in the sky, and the walls of the vortex trembled. Given recent events, it's popularly theorized by historians that Celestia used a sonic rain boom to pierce the storm. But this is highly unlikely. None of the princesses have ever demonstrated the capabilities to perform a sonic rain boom, which was only proved possible in the last few years. It's more likely the princess had some sort of magical means, but whatever that was, she has never divulged the truth of the matter. Celestia remained within the vortex for nearly 2 days, when quite suddenly, the winds of Eternity's Crossing calmed, and Celestia flew safely back. Not a moment after her hooves touched down on the deck of the ship, the vortex began anew with even greater force. The princess has never spoken of what happened, but whatever her trial there, she returned victorious, and carrying with her a relic of the ruined city, which we now know to be named Enmerkar. Presenting the relic to Tarrasque, the great dragon now had no choice but to aid the council, as she had promised. Confiding with them in secret, she presented them with a strategy, as well as an item from her hoard. For the sake of maintaining secrecy, the council spoke nothing of it afterwards, but their looks of displeasure were well noted in history, as Tarrasque had forced on them perhaps the biggest gambit of all, as it put all nations at risk. When Bahamut was at last tearing down the magical barriers protecting Equestria, the council stepped forward to confront him. Rather than see their countries torn asunder by his enslaved armies, the world leaders issued a direct challenge to the Dragon King. If they lost, they would surrender without dispute, offering him a golden crown should he win. Bahamut was immediately suspicious. He was aware of the council's collaboration with his sister Tarrasque, but the opportunity was too great to simply refuse. But instead of the crown they seemed so eager to give him, he demanded something else. A contribution of good faith to prove their sincerity. He demanded the crown of Princess Luna. Celestia had kept the tiara as a memento of her beloved sister, and relinquishing so precious a thing to the monstrous Bahamut was unthinkable. But without it, Bahamut would not accept their challenge and continue his rampage. And so the princess offered up her sister's crown as the symbol of victory. It was a battle hard fought. The unified leaders working together to fight for the freedom of all, Celestia included, but it was not a battle they could win. Bahamut was too powerful, and he bested the council as if they were figures in a board game. Knowing they would be defeated, Celestia used her magic to desperately hurl the golden crown at Bahamut, only to have it melt under the flames of his breath. Confident he'd beaten their trick, Bahamut spared the council just long enough for them to watch as he claimed his tribute, placing Luna's crown on his pinky like a ring. But this was Bahamut's folly. With Tarrasque's guidance, they had laid their trap with greater subtlety than the Dragon King had realized. The gem adorning Luna's crown had been replaced with one from Tarrasque's horn, a soul stone enchanted with dragonfire that would capture the spirit of whosoever should wear it, the same gem that had adorned the golden crown they had first offered to Bahamut. This was the same magic that Bahamut used to enslave his armies, and with Tarrasque's help, had been turned against him by the council. With his soul bound in the gem, Bahamut's greed was taken from him, and his immense size with it. What's more, he was compelled to serve whoever possessed the Soul Stone, and released all those he had enslaved with his magic. The Dragon King was defeated, but those who had suffered most under his wrath yet demanded he pay for his crimes. Some wanted him to remain enslaved and bound in service, but to give any nation control over so powerful a dragon was unthinkable. Others still wanted to put him to death. Eventually, it was Tarrasque herself who pleaded on Bahamut's behalf. Much as she despised him, he was still her brother, and she mocked the council for so easily stooping to the same cruelty. In the end, Tarrasque entrusted her brother's fate to Celestia. Not all of the council agreed with this, and Equestria maintains strained relations with those countries even to this day. The terms of Bahamut's penance are held in strict confidence, so how and where he's kept are unknown. But despite the reluctance of certain leaders in this one matter, it was the unified efforts of all that had brought about the defeat of the Dragon King. The emergency summit they had created to resolve the crisis was to be maintained, not only for dire events, but for the mutual benefit and support of all. An international council of leaders, fairly shared and fairly ruled. This was the formal establishment of what would eventually be called the Celestial Council. And their first actions were to aid in the restoration of those nations devastated by the Dragon King's conquest. Germany had finally learned to put aside its pride and welcomed the assistance of others. Working together brought in new ideas and new trade. Sadly, this prosperous new beginning could not be shared with Zebraca. The devastation wrought on the zebra's homeland was more dreadful than any other, as if the earth itself had been poisoned. Not even the council could find an answer to this, so they instead offered refuge. The zebras accepted, and began to spread far and wide across all the known lands of the world. And while no solution has yet been discovered, many zebras still talk of one day returning to their ancient home, when a cure has at last been found. The scars of Bahamut's rampage began to fade, and the new unity brought on by the council inspired peoples of all races to begin commingling. And with this great sharing of minds came a new age of technological inspiration. In the year 792 of the Second Celestial Era, the world would see its first ever steam-powered engine. The first rail line was used to bridge the great distance between Equestria and Germany, crossing through the heavy snows of the Schwarzwälder. It took nearly 3 decades to complete, but the success of the rail line allowed for safe and rapid transport between the two nations, opening up trade in a way never seen. Almost immediately after, plans for the construction of railroad lines were laid out between countries and major cities. Only in recent decades have we seen the inclusion of new railways to smaller townships, such as Appaloosa. Then, just over 100 years ago, a family of seed collectors came to Canterlot in roaming, and was bequeathed a portion of land by Celestia herself. This land happened to be part of the princess's own holdings, retained from the time when the royal palace resided within the heart of the Everfree Forest. The Apple family gratefully accepted the land, and over time, it became the small, bustling town of Ponyville. And while seemingly a small item, the establishment of the township of Ponyville is what brings us into the current age. It was the development of the rail lines that began a steady wave of technological advancements through Equestria that have slowly been building through the last 2 centuries. The historians have called this age in advancement an industrial revolution, but it's really only the tip of the iceberg. In the last few years alone, we've seen the return of Princess Luna and the Crystal Empire, Discord's revival and reformation, the first confirmed sonic rainboom, the wedding of Princess Cadenza, and the crowning of Twilight Sparkle, the Princess of Friendship. We're truly fortunate to be living in such a momentous era, and I personally can't wait to see what other historical moments await Equestria in the future. There you have it. This concludes the condensed history of Equestria. I guess it'll be a little while before I see you again. You'll have to think about what you want to read next. Oh, and did I tell you? It seems the head librarian has gone ahead and gotten permission for those seminars I was telling you about, and she's asked me to be the instructor. We're calling it Historical Equestria, and every class will review a different portion of history, culture, or mythology. Seeing as how you've been so interested, I thought you might like to join. Thank you for coming by the Canterlot Archives, and hopefully I'll see you in the future. And there you have it, folks! The condensed history of Equestria has concluded. I hope our last episode was exciting enough for all of you, and we've got more to come. Next month we have our 500 subscriber special Q&A, which admittedly has exceeded that number quite a bit by now, but I digress. So, got a few updates and announcements for you. First off, since a number of you have been asking, with the Q&A coming up next month, I will be allowing questions to be asked here on YouTube, but only in the comments of this episode. So if you have no Tumblr account or can't send one to my Ask Box, now's the time to post it. You've got 2 weeks to ask your questions though. After that, I need to get scripting my answers. You can also send questions to my Tumblr's Ask Box as usual, whose link is located in the description. Be sure to specify if the question is towards SkyShadow or me, the Overman. Questions asked in other episodes will not be accepted, so be sure to post those questions in the comments now. Next up, Historical Equestria is currently holding its first ever art contest. With the new set featuring the history of the zebras, we're looking to put SkyShadow in a brand new location. So, this is your chance to draw what you think the Canterlot Archive should look like. Now, we are specifically looking for a background image. No background ponies, if you please. And don't worry about props, we've got that covered. Requirements for the picture are that it must be in the archives and that it must be of high resolution quality. You can send it to me via Tumblr or through a link sent to me via YouTube message. The winner of the contest will not only get their location featured on the show, but they can also select any one of the images used in Historical Equestria to have as a print. Runners-up will have their background retained for possible use in future episodes, with due crediting, of course. Due date is the 16th of September, so get cracking. And finally, following the completion of the Q&A episode, Historical Equestria will be taking a month-long break before debuting the Zebra series. There are multiple reasons for this: collecting the votes for Series 3, finishing scripting on the Zebra miniseries, yada yada. But the primary reason is that it's convention season for me, and I'm already way behind on my costumes due to work. I may or may not have hinted at this, but I am a cosplay addict. I like to compete in masquerades a lot, and this year will be no different. I have some pretty big costumes in the works that I really need to get cracking on, and they have to be done soon. So, sorry guys, but that comes first. That about concludes our updates. See you all next month at the Q&A, where I'll likewise have some questions for you. I've got a couple ideas for Historical Equestria I'd like to run by everyone before I take a stab at them. So, see you next month.